This bill, the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986 that I'll sign in a few minutes, is the most comprehensive reform of our immigration laws since 1952.
In 1986, a Republican president gave 3 million undocumented people a path to citizenship. It was the last time Congress did anything on immigration. And today, we're going back to see exactly what happened and why it still matters.
President Reagan did sign the sweeping new Immigration Reform Act today. He said it protects the sacred possession of American citizenship. Millions of illegal aliens will be eligible for amnesty and will be able to apply for legal residency status, no questions asked. But no such bright futures for other aliens, ones who arrived after the cutoff date. CBS News correspondent David Dow tells us the new law increases the chances that they'll lose their reason for being here, their jobs.
The lines form before dawn at many offices of the Immigration and Naturalization Service. That's business as usual. But now the INS is gearing up for more than 1 million more immigrants, candidates for amnesty like Jaime Preciado.
How many years have you been in the United States?
17 years.
That is 17 years as an illegal resident, long enough to raise an American teenager. Preciado and his wife appear to qualify for legal residence, amnesty for those who've lived here since January 1982. For the family, a happy prospect.
That way my parents are legal here and, well, maybe I'll have a better chance.
But for millions of others in this country, the new sweeping immigration law brings the prospect of uncertainty and upheaval.
Bueno, pues yo me sentiría muy mal porque
Juana may qualify for amnesty, but not her brother-in-law, who helps support her 6 children. They worry that he may lose his job and have to return to Mexico. The concern stems from the new reality that will face thousands of businesses and households after a 6-month education period. A system of warnings and eventually criminal penalties for hiring undocumented workers.
It's really remarkable. No industry seems untouched. It's hardly an individual today in Southern California that doesn't get touched by an undocumented alien in some fashion.
Millions of undocumented and millions of documents to check. David Demain already demands Social Security cards from his garment workers, but says he doesn't know how many are fraudulent.
Right now, we have no way of checking them.
Some project labor shortages and higher prices for services now performed by illegal aliens. But few experts believe the law will end altogether the use of undocumented labor. There is simply too much of it, even for a beefed-up immigration service.
I don't think it's an enforceable law. For a certain sector of business, it's going to be business as usual.
Some say the economy of the undocumented will simply be driven further underground, and many aliens will stick it out, waiting for another amnesty law someday that will place them in the lines of the hopeful. David Dow, CBS News, Los Angeles.
That news broadcast captured a moment of real hope. But to understand why that law happened at all, we have to go back further, to the churches, the communities, and the people who made it impossible for Congress to keep looking away.
Now to the battle over so-called sanctuary cities.
Sanctuary cities that protect undocumented immigrants have once again become a flashpoint in the country's debate over illegal immigration.
Clashes on Capitol Hill as sanctuary cities face new scrutiny.
But sanctuary cities aren't new. They have a long and controversial history. The concept of sanctuary captured public attention in the 1980s when Guatemala and El Salvador were in the middle of violent civil wars. Death squads targeted political opponents, including union leaders like Patty Barceló's father, who was kidnapped and tortured by the Guatemalan military.
He just disappeared. For months they had him. One night my aunt's car pulled up and I see this man and he was skin and bones. He looked so old and he called my name, but I ran from him because he did not look like my dad.
The family fled the country, along with hundreds of thousands of refugees heading for the U.S. When one group of migrants nearly died crossing the border near Tucson, a local minister named John Fife got involved.
They told me about death squads. They told me about people who had been kidnapped and tortured. These were middle-class folks who were fleeing for their lives.
Fife started helping migrants apply for political asylum, but he quickly ran into a problem. The government said they were economic migrants in search of better jobs.
They come here for a better life. They come here for better jobs. But that doesn't entitle them to asylum.
We'd take in people who had torture marks all over their body, and the immigration judge would order them deported the next day.
Fife and a small group decided to take matters into their own hands, sneaking migrants across the border and hiding them in churches.
I assumed it was illegal, but I could not claim to be a Christian and not be involved in trying to protect refugees' lives.
One of the refugees was Patty Barcelo. American church workers took her family across the border from Mexico.
We walked and walked, and they said, once you have 1 foot on the other side, we will help you guys to have a new life. And they did.
Afraid he might be arrested, Fife did something unexpected. He went public.
If we were public with what we had been doing, then we might have a base of support. The major breakthrough occurred when 60 Minutes called and said, can we film a border crossing?
They crawled through a hole in a fence and dropped into a ditch. Several minutes later, they emerged onto a side street in Douglas, Arizona.
We were inundated with phone calls.
It is the concept of religious sanctuary, churches giving refuge to undocumented Salvadorans and Guatemalans.
At least 100 sanctuaries are now open.
270 churches in 33 states, using an underground network to smuggle aliens across the border.
Colleges and universities got the idea, and then cities.
Voted to make its city a sanctuary for illegal aliens.
The national press just ate it up. They were appealing, they were doing a moral cause.
For nearly 3 years, the sanctuary movement operated in the open, bringing Central Americans into the country, getting them immigration lawyers, and helping them start new lives. It was a dilemma for federal prosecutors like Melvin McDonald.
Usually you're pursuing really bad people that have committed bad crimes. With the sanctuary movement, you had nuns, rabbis, priests. After a while, I felt it was almost a farce. It went way beyond the religious argument that was being used to be a political statement. They were basically sticking their nose at law enforcement, saying, we don't care what your laws are.
Sometimes you cannot love both God and the civil authority. Sometimes you have to make a choice.
We're not going to let any group or organization, even if you're people on the cloth, go forward and defy the laws of the country. We're just not going to do it.
U.S. immigration officers, federal agents, open the door.
The government launched a 10-month undercover investigation to infiltrate the sanctuary movement.
They sent paid informants and even tape-recorded worship services in our churches.
A file for sanctuary site information.
When you use the sanctuary of a church to plan the breaking of laws, I don't think that the sanctuary should be protected.
Fife and other church workers were charged with smuggling and concealing undocumented immigrants. In the end, 8 of them were convicted, but didn't serve any prison time. After religious groups filed a separate lawsuit, the government let hundreds of thousands of Central Americans reapply for asylum, including Patty Barcelo. She went on to raise a family and work at a hospital in Tucson.
We had an opportunity to stay here because of people that cared enough, because of people that wanted us to live.
The sanctuary movement faded from the headlines for decades. But then,
the sanctuary movement has reignited once again.
By the mid-2000s, things had changed. It wasn't refugees in other countries seeking sanctuary. It was undocumented immigrants already living here trying to avoid deportation. And it wasn't just churches at the center of the controversy.
The issue? So-called sanctuary cities.
Dozens of cities across America that protect illegals and do not report them.
Many so-called sanctuary cities, like Seattle, took a public stand by not asking about immigration status when providing services and not always cooperating with federal immigration officials.
If people are afraid to call the police because they're going to get deported, the chances are they're not going to report crimes, they're not going to be good witnesses of crimes. And we have to have people that cooperate with their local police if we're going to have any effect at all on the crime rate.
But starting in 2015, crimes committed by undocumented immigrants became a centerpiece of Donald Trump's campaign and first term in office. And while studies show immigrants are less likely to commit crimes than native-born citizens, the issue fanned a heated political debate about illegal immigration.
Millions of undocumented immigrants in the U.S. are bracing for raids and deportations.
In response, during the first Trump administration, hundreds of new churches promised to give sanctuary again, decades after John Fife helped start the sanctuary movement.
The ancient tradition of sanctuary is going to be as viable as it's been for thousands of years, and it may be more relevant than ever.
It's deja vu all over again. Don't complain when somebody enforces the law, just like we did in the 1980s.
There is unquestionably this gigantic anti-immigrant feeling and backlash. There is a mass movement that did not exist in the 80s to deport people in the country illegally.
In 2016, Sixto Paz, who had been ordered deported to Mexico after overstaying his work visa, sought sanctuary in this church in Phoenix.
Ni por la cabeza me pasó yo estar aquí en Santuario. Vine porque no hay otra decisión.
He was in the country illegally, but he had also spent more than 20 years building a life here and has 3 kids who are U.S. citizens.
Lo vine a hacer por mi familia, por mis hijas, por mi hijo, que todavía dependen de mí. Muy sencillo, amas a tus hijos, so vas a dejar tu propia familia tirada, nomás para irte, nomás porque un juez te dice, ¿sabes qué? Te tienes que ir.
Paz stayed in the church in Phoenix for most of the first Trump administration.
A new warning from President Donald Trump.
But in his second term, Trump has threatened more aggressive immigration enforcement, prompting lawsuits.
He's directed federal prosecutors to investigate any state or local officials who do not enforce his immigration policies.
And he has changed policy to allow immigration officials to make arrests in schools and churches, calling into question the future of the sanctuary movement.
That sanctuary movement forced a national conversation, and it collided head-on with a government that was simultaneously ramping up enforcement. The tension between those two forces is exactly what produced the 1986 law.
You'll see these groups of 10, 15, 20. They've got their guide in place. The guide knows the route that he or she is going to take them. And you've got groups all around the side of this hill.
As dusk approaches, both sides ready for the hunt. On this typical night, Border Patrol agents will capture about 600 people along this section. The agents approach their jobs with a heightened sense of mission, buoyed by increased support and a new level of rhetoric.
It's like an invasion, there's no question about that. And I don't liken it to a war as, we're not playing war games, but we're being invaded nonetheless. If we don't control these borders, we will be totally outnumbered by the third world poor and needy that are going to take control of this nation just by being here.
It is early afternoon at the fence that separates Mexico from the United States near San Diego, and what some describe as a daily invasion is just beginning. This is an international border in the loosest sense of the term. It is porous. In many places along these dusty hills and canyons between San Diego and Tijuana, there is not even a fence. Before dusk, many, mostly Mexicans, will make their way here to a staging area, a couple of 100 yards inside the United States. Here, before they continue their journeys, they will wait for nightfall, when they will try to evade teams of agents of the U.S. Border Patrol.
This sector that you're all entering on duty to work is the largest in the nation. Over 2,000 aliens are apprehended every single day in the western region.
Harold Izell has earned a reputation as an outspoken law enforcement official. His welcoming speech is almost a battle cry.
You're doing this for the salvation, in my opinion, of our entire nation. If we don't gain control of these borders within the next 5 years, the America that we know today is not going to be the America of tomorrow.
This year, while many federal agencies absorbed cutbacks, the Border Patrol received a 15% budget increase and added 850 new agents along the Mexican frontier, together with millions of dollars worth of new equipment.
Okay, they're running across the road right now. Yeah, I got a unit over there.
Now they're just coming up over the top of the canyon now. As soon as they get farther north, I'll make a run on them.
Well, what we're trying to do in San Diego is just catch up. With the additional people that we'll have on the border, it'll give us a greater presence and a greater ability to apprehend maybe 15, 20% more than we are now. But that still is a 30% getaway factor. And we're not going to catch all 100% that are coming through. We'll never have enough Border Patrolmen to do it.
They are involved in a process of increasing criminalization of the question of Mexican undocumented migration to the United States, which I think is not only destructive, I think that is very unhealthy for the increasingly complex and important bilateral relations that we have in many other areas.
Jorge Bustamante is director of Mexico's Center for Border Studies in Tijuana. He and other critics of U.S. border policies trace an increase in U.S.-Mexico tensions to the February kidnapping and subsequent murder in Mexico of U.S. Drug Enforcement agent Enrique Camarena. In pursuit of clues, U.S. officials began a thorough search of automobiles entering the country. Travelers waited for up to 8 hours, and border area businessmen complained of retaliatory schemes to harm Mexican tourism and commerce. Another border incident, the shooting of a 12-year-old Mexican boy by a U.S. Border Patrol agent, led to an angry exchange of diplomatic notes between the U.S. and Mexican governments. The boy who was shot, Humberto Carrillo, was on Mexican soil at the time of the shooting. He was shot in the back as he reached down to pick up a rock to throw at agents on the U.S. side of the fence. Carrillo and his attorney say the shooting was unjustified because the boy never actually threw a rock. U.S. officials say agents were in jeopardy because rocks were thrown. In San Diego, civil rights groups claim the shooting is just the most extreme example of what they see as an increase in abuse by Border Patrol agents.
We're seeing all kinds of abuse, physical, verbal, and racial abuse in particular. They're instilled with the mentality that undocumented people are the enemy. You know, they have this, that's why we see a lot of this shoot first, ask questions later type of mentality on the border.
The last 2 years here in San Diego County alone, we've arrested over 400,000 illegal aliens. The number of justifiable complaints for that number of arrests has been very minimal.
Who decides what's justifiable?
The complaints are investigated, and if they're specific, we look into each and every one of them. If there is any justifiable wrongdoing on the part of our officers, the proper action is taken.
Proper action has been taken against only 2 Border Patrol agents in the past 2 years, according to an INS spokesman who said the 2 agents found to have abused aliens were disciplined. They received days off without pay. Activists believe the Border Patrol goes easy on its own people, but patrol agents say they don't get enough credit, particularly for their actions protecting illegal immigrants from Mexican bandits who prey on illegal aliens as they cross the border. Dealing with bandits is a small part of Border Patrol activities. Although agents are constantly on the alert, the vast majority of illegal immigrants rounded up by the Border Patrol put up no resistance. They go peacefully.
Whether or not the perception is the Border Patrol is tougher than it used to be doesn't really bother us. What bothers us is this invasion is taking over our nation, and we've got to stop it.
I think that is a very unfortunate combination of a person who is trying to stimulate the importance in the American public mind the importance of its own force, its own office, bureaucracy, trying to portray that what he's doing is going to save America of a very serious danger that is out there. This is appealing to elements in the American public, some of them latent, that had to do with apprehensions about everything that is foreign.
Researcher Jorge Bustamante criticizes INS Commissioner Ezell for using his position to push a political point of view. On that subject, Ezell demurs. He is an adamant proponent of federal immigration reform.
And the only way we're ever going to control this border is through a reform in our legislation and makes it illegal to hire these people. They're coming for jobs.
Border Patrol agents say they have become accustomed to the frustrations of their jobs. They are overwhelmed by the numbers of people they try to apprehend. Many they arrest and rearrest. But for all the tough talk from officials, the agents are not without empathy. Tom Merchant has been watching and trying to prevent this steady stream for 6 years, and has no doubt where he would be if the shoe were on the other foot.
I'd be coming across right behind him.
So, after years of raids, pressure, and political debate, what did the law actually say? Who qualified? Who didn't? And what did it mean in practice?
What did the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986 do? Have you ever wondered how laws shape the lives of immigrants in the United States? The Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986 is a key piece of legislation that aimed to address illegal immigration and its impact on civil rights. This law introduced several important measures that continue to influence immigration policy today. First, let's talk about employer sanctions and verification requirements. The act made it illegal for employers to knowingly hire individuals who were not authorized to work in the United States. To enforce this, employers had to verify the immigration status of their employees. This led to the creation of the Form I-9, which employers must use to confirm eligibility for employment. If an employer violated these rules, they faced civil penalties, including fines. This aimed to reduce the economic incentive for unauthorized immigration by limiting job opportunities. Next, the act included a legalization program, often referred to as amnesty. This allowed certain undocumented immigrants who had been living in the U.S. since before January 1, 1982, to apply for temporary and then permanent legal status. Applicants needed to meet specific requirements, such as having no serious criminal record and basic knowledge of U.S. history and government. This program aimed to integrate long-term undocumented residents into the legal framework without imposing penalties like fines or back taxes. Another important aspect of the Immigration Reform and Control Act was its anti-discrimination protections. The law prohibited discrimination in employment based on national origin or citizenship status for individuals authorized to work. This meant that employers could not discriminate against citizens, permanent residents, refugees, or asylees in hiring or firing decisions. However, it is important to note that these protections did not extend to unauthorized workers, which created a complex legal situation. The Act also included provisions for confidentiality and enforcement. It required that legalization application records be kept confidential and imposed penalties for breaches of this confidentiality. Additionally, it provided for administrative and judicial review of decisions related to legalization applications, ensuring due process for applicants. Furthermore, the Immigration Reform and Control Act limited access to certain federal benefits for legalized immigrants for 5 years after receiving their status. However, it allowed access to educational and job training programs, as well as continued refugee assistance, regardless of status adjustment. Lastly, the Act had an impact on families. Although it did not initially address the status of children of legalized immigrants, an executive action by President Ronald Reagan in 1987 deferred deportation for minor children living with parents who legalized their status under the Act. This affected approximately 100,000 families. In summary, The Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986 combined measures to enforce immigration laws with protections against discrimination for authorized workers and a significant legalization program for certain undocumented immigrants. It sought to balance immigration control with civil rights, although some groups remained vulnerable. This law continues to shape discussions around immigration and civil rights in the United States today.
If this channel is new to you, subscribe and share your thoughts and concerns in the comments. Record today, protect tomorrow.